My name is Merrill Dubrow, CEO of Mark Research. I'm a 35-year veteran of the research and insights community and the host of our podcast, On the Mark. On the Mark is focusing on executives and thought leaders in the world, sharing their insights, strategy, and personal experiences. I promise this podcast will be filled with tough, pointed questions with real, insightful, and emotional answers. Today's guest is my good friend and founder, CEO of Seek Company, Tim Urmston. Tim, welcome to the On the Mark podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Merrill. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. All right, Tim, you and I have talked many a time. 2019 was a big year for you guys. You sold the company, right?
We did. We decided it was time and kind of moved forward on it. So it was great. Been a great year.
So let's talk about 2019. Before you sold, what were some of the thought processes and what were some of the things, the milestones that you wanted to cross before you did sell, and then ultimately why you did sell?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're thinking about selling your business, you want to make sure you're going to get the value from the business that you're after. And so we had to make sure our company was healthy, that our bottom line was healthy because of the way that companies are valued. And so we took the time for a good year and a half just to make sure that those numbers were right on our side, that the company was healthy, that our culture was healthy, we were in a good place, that our people, really felt cared for, and all that was going on. And then being transparent through the process of just letting people know what we were considering and things like that. So all that had to be sort of thought through early on, and then getting the company healthy, arriving at that. Then you got to look for the right partner. You got to understand who's the right buyer. We vetted probably 10 companies before we decided on directions to be the company to buy us. And the reason for that was we wanted to make sure there was a culture fit. And I had three things that I was looking for when I went in. I wanted to make sure that our brand was left alone. I needed a promise from the buyers. Our brand was left alone, that our people, because we had built the right team, we had the right people in place, that our people were going to be okay, that we weren't going to do any shrinking of the company or taking away of any of those people. And then thirdly, I asked for a seat at the leadership table, so that our division of the bigger company would have a voice. And that was what I used as a vetting process for these companies that were coming in. And so if it was a private equity firm, they would say no to quite a few of those things. And so we kind of eliminated private equity firms from that standpoint. Being another research firm, we just kind of went through the series and directions. The company that bought us ultimately said yes to all those. And there was an opportunity for ownership, not only for me, but for some of my folks. And so it was a plus all the way through, and that's kind of how we made the decision.
No, that's exciting. So, you brought up a few different points that I want to comment on. Obviously, you said numerous times the company is healthy, and you talked about the culture is healthy. How does a CEO, I'm a CEO as well, and everybody isn't going to tell me everything. If there's things bothering people, are they really going to kick open the door and say, hey, Tim, this is what's going on? How do you monitor, how have you been able to monitor the culture and really get a good handle on the pulse? Because I find that very hard at times.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's built over time. I'm not sure that's something you can get to overnight, especially if you're a CEO who is a bit distant from the business or the consultants or your researchers, et cetera. And I lived in that space for a while. But one of the things I started doing as we approached this time was I started having quarterly coffees with my staff. And not every CEO can do this, but I at least think you can do it with a portion of your staff on a regular basis. But quarterly coffees, what it did, and all it was going in and saying, hey, what's working, what's not working? Help me understand, where you think the business can be improved, where our opportunities lie, where are our weak spots or our blind spots, that questions like that. These were hour-long coffees. We'd walk and talk to a coffee house and then come back. And I would get some really rich and deep information. Now, the first time I did it, there was a little bit of this, why is the CEO or at the time, the CEO asking us to meet with him? So there was a little bit of trepidation and fear going into those. You could tell on their part. But you have to set them at ease and let them know that, hey, I want you to speak into the direction of this company. That was part of our culture. And so by having those coffees, you learn so much. And I came up with probably 5 or 6 themes every quarter of things we needed to work on. And those became talking points and sort of mantras for developing and building the culture, because people need to know that you heard them. They actually don't care if you act on what they've given you. They just want to know that you heard them. And so when you can play those back in the form of themes and talking about what you heard, they're going to be a lot more likely to trust and to talk more on that next quarterly coffee. And all of a sudden now they do have a voice in the organization, which is what a lot of people long for in a company. And I think that's how you build a culture.
Yeah, no, I think that's impressive. And I know, having presented at your company a number of times, Tim, the cultures there is very important to you, and you've done a phenomenal job. So let's talk about this. You decide that, hey, look, it's time to sell. How long after that did you let your leadership team know and then let the company know? And once you did that, along the process, because that takes a little while, did you lose any staff along the way that said, look, I don't want to be part of anything bigger. It's not what I really want to do. And I think those are interesting questions. So let's tackle those next.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is change management, right? I mean, and that is a really difficult thing to lead through. Just transparently, it's really hard. The short answer is, and I think this is fascinating, it's probably a testimony to both my leadership team and my staff, as well as, the company that bought us. But the two members of my executive team, I started talking to them about selling the company a year before we sold it. And I said, I want you guys to know I'm thinking about this. I want you to know that I'm vetting, and I need the freedom to go do this. And in the freedom to go do this, I need you guys to carry the mantle of leading the company, the actual day-to-day work of the company while I go and I do this. And they embraced it. And so it's a testimony to them. We've got Justin and Courtney who are on our team, and they're phenomenal as the senior vice president of strategy and the COO of the company. And they led the day-to-day. They took care of the staff. They made sure everybody had what they needed and just kept the business running effectively. We lost nobody. Nobody left the company as a result of this acquisition and letting people know. We let the staff know a little bit later, a little bit closer to the time we decided. And there was fear. I mean, you could see it in their eyes, like, oh, man, what does this mean? Are we still going to be us? Are we still going to live with the same values and principles? Are all these mantras of, everybody speaks in the direction of the company? Things like, we want this to be the best place you've ever worked, and your significant other would say the same. Those were things that are sacred to our staff, and they're going, are those things going to still be there when we do this? And what's remarkable is after the transition, you really didn't feel much different because of those vetting things. Remember, our brand was left alone just to do our work. We just now have 27 salespeople, really great people who are out selling what we do. And actually, we're scaling our business because of this presence that we now have and awareness that's going out through this mechanism. So it's a remarkable thing. I don't know that I could necessarily coach somebody on how to do this. I think it's just, pay attention to what's important as you're going through and what's important to your people. Make sure your ears are wide open. Make sure you're transparent as possible. And sometimes you just have to let the chips fall where they may, and make sure you've got a good partner who's coming in and acquiring you.
Yeah. Some good takeaways. What's the biggest adjustment for you personally? Because look, let's face facts. You called the shots. You were the founder. You were the CEO. You're the king. You do what you want. You had the greatest boss in the world. Not to say your boss right now, your current boss right now, isn't the greatest boss in the world, but it's a little bit different, right? I mean, you sell the company, you got a new boss. There might be a report that you have to submit. There may be a presentation you need to deliver on. You may get called out on numbers, whatever it is. How's the adjustment been with a new boss, with the boss? Huh.
Yeah, so it's phenomenal. So the one thing I told Jim when he took us over is I said, listen, I haven't had a boss in 23 years except Jesus, and I didn't always do what he asked me to do. And so it's going to be a rough road for you. I've just kind of pointed out, I'm going to need some of that breadth and flexibility in what I'm doing and that sort of thing. And he's been remarkable. He's just kind of let me go and let us run the company the way we know to run it, at least the division of the company, the way we know to run it. And with that freedom, and I would say that to anybody who is acquiring, if you're coming in and taking over a company and you've got somebody who's had success, leading a company and has brought that, trust that process, just kind of keep them in play. What I call it is give them guardrails, but give them a 5-lane highway to play on, right? Because they need that room and that space to lead. Otherwise, you'll just kind of squeeze them out. You'll suffocate them, and that'll hurt the company because remember, the culture is kind of tied to what they built. And so you need that longevity to make that. So there's an art to it. And I will say, Jim Lane and the leadership team at Directions have done a great job of just giving us that breadth in that space. It's been great. And we're on our own, financial structure and other things. And all those things all play into a great acquisition.
Right. So if somebody had asked me to describe you and some of the qualities that you have that I'm impressed with, certainly your leadership, certainly you're a coach. I love your competitiveness. But at the top of my list for you, I'm going to talk about you like you're not on the phone, like we're not doing a podcast, is you're an amazing communicator and presenter. I'm curious because, I remember, Tim, way back in the day in 1991, when I was on stage at my first industry event at the Opryland Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, I used to use index cards. Back in the day, probably a lot of their listeners won't even know what index cards are, but I used index cards, and I remember getting up there and visibly shaking. And I remember my voice cracking, and it was a horrible experience. And from that point forward, I made it my business to be a better communicator, a better presenter, because I just felt that those were attributes that needed to really play into being successful in moving your career forward. But how did you become such an amazing presenter and communicator? Because, you're not 100% born with that as a 2-year-old, and, you have to learn how to do that. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Wow. So first of all, I think it's the master asking the student to describe how to be a great speaker. So
I don't know about that.
Speaking, if you speak to a crowd, the way I like to view speaking to a crowd, I don't care how big the crowd is as if we're sitting on my back porch after I just cut the grass and we're having a conversation with a beer in hand, right? If you can bring it at that level, then I think that's great. You make it a conversation. And I don't necessarily mean a back and forth conversation, but you talk to people as if we're in a relaxed environment. There's no pressure here. It's just us having a conversation around something. I think that's one. But somebody taught me this a long time ago. When people walk into a room to hear a speaker talk, there's 2 words that you need to see written on the front of their foreheads, right across their foreheads. Let's say you had a big piece of duct tape, and these words are written on their head when they walk in. The words are, "Please inspire me," and "Please challenge me." And I think speakers who do both of those things are the most successful speakers out there. So when people walk into a room, you inspire them. You inspire them by empathically talking to them at their level about things they're going through that they can relate to. I've seen speakers go off on topics that people have no idea or no resonance. There's no resonance, right? There's no the stories don't resonate because they're way far away from what people experience on a day-to-day level. When you're inspiring people, you're trying to talk to them about things they're going through right now in their lives that they're dealing with, that they go, oh, I mean, you've seen it. There's a slide that I use in one of my presentations on leadership where it's a picture of a chair, and then all the words that it's just got words on it. It might be lonely, or it might be isolated, or it might be fear of failure, or it might be, should I run, or am I marketable, or what is that? And I'm just trying to describe the emotions that leaders go through. And I asked the crowd, do any of these words resonate? And the answer from all of them is yes, all of them resonate because I felt all of these at some point. That's the piece. And so when you get into that level, and then you can say, let me talk about what leadership looks like, going through all these emotions, right? Now I'm in. As an audience, I'm captured. I'm leaning in because you've now caught me at something that resonates with me. On the back end, typically you leave them with a challenge. You leave them with something to do when they walk out of the room. What will you do with what you just learned? So it's not good enough to just sit here and learn it and then go to lunch and forget it an hour later, right? You're sitting at lunch and they're like, hey, what do you talk about? And you're like, I don't really know. I just remember it was good. And I think if you give them a challenge and you give them something to do, that challenge is the thing that sticks. That's what has the sticking power. And so I'm going to challenge you and hold you accountable to walk this out. And I want you to announce to somebody that you're close to that you're going to do this, whatever that is. And so when you inspire and you challenge, I believe people walk away with not only great information and a reason that that's important, but they also walk away with this, what am I going to do about it that's going to affect my staff, that's going to affect my leadership, that's going to affect my decisions, that's going to affect the way I structure this company, affect my culture, whatever that topic is. And all of a sudden, this becomes just an amazing experience for them when they walk out. And that's what you want to do. You want to change hearts. You want to change hearts. You want to change mindsets for the good, to help these people, do something good in the world.
Right. But let me ask you, give me a percentage to this. What percentage of the people or the presentations that you sit in inspire you or challenge you? What percentage out of 100 do you think that is?
I don't know. I'd probably say it's pretty low. Although I think people who speak a lot are at a disadvantage when they're listening to speakers because we're always examining the mechanics and things like that, right? And so we sometimes, because of that, we'll even miss some of the things that are coming our way. So I want to acknowledge that first of all as a caveat. But I also think it's a pretty low percentage in general anyway. Again, and I think it's because the speaker has something important they want to say. So here's a great way to think about it. I heard this a long time ago. They said there are people who have hay, and there are people who know how to get it to the goats. There are very few people who know who both have the hay and can get it to the goats.
I think that most conference presentations, they don't convey their point because they don't connect to the audience. They don't engage the audience. They stand behind the podium. They don't move. They have very poor eye contact and a lot of other reasons. I like how you framed it, which is inspire me and challenge me. And you do a masterful job. What is there a tip, Tim's tip or two that you could share that, because most of the listeners know how important this is. Some want to get better at being a better presenter, being a better communicator, effectively selling their ideas internally or externally. Is there a best practice or a tip that you could share that would help them?
There's a whole lot of stuff I think that goes into it. So first I would start with, just start doing it. And I think that's where a lot of speakers get messed up, is they don't find the opportunities to do it. I'll tell you a quick story. My first time I presented to a large crowd, I was going to speak to about 5,000 people the next day. You're going to laugh at this. So my wife's in bed. I have my notes open at the foot of the bed. I'm like, can you just listen to this while I run you through it? I'm about halfway through and I hear snoring. And I look over, she's asleep. And I'm going, oh my God, I'm in trouble. Like, this is bad. This is really, really bad. And so, I was looking for anybody that would listen to just try out some of the material on to say, what does that look like? And, so my wife and I, we joke about this all the time, but it's absolutely true that that did happen. But went out the next day and killed it because I had the opportunity to just practice it in front of people. It doesn't matter where you practice, just try it. It's like playing golf. You're never going to be good at golf unless you play it a lot. And so you need to get out there, whether it's you're talking to 5 people, 10 people, 25, 2,500, 5,000, 10,000, doesn't matter. You just got to do it. And then when you're doing it, you have to be vulnerable. And let me just say this about speakers who come across as knowing everything, who come across as I've got all the answers and you need to just do what I say and then you'll be better. I think they miss something in that. If you can't get up and talk about your own inadequacies at times or the ways in which you failed the same way they failed, you never make that empathic connection and you never create an on-ramp for people to come and connect with you, right? And connect to that tension that you feel and they feel. Once you guys are wrapped in that same tension through empathy, because you told a story about what you've gone through and maybe a story about what they've gone through, and you've connected those two, and then you start talking about the material that you want to get into them, they're now wide open to listen to it when you've made the empathic connection and you're vulnerable. But most leaders, and I would argue most speakers, have a hard time making that empathic connection first and being vulnerable. They want to get up and just sort of spout their wares and what's, what they're great at and what people should be great at, that kind of thing. So it's more theory than practice. Is that helpful?
No, it's very helpful. Very helpful. I can probably close my eyes and think about the listeners of the podcast, and they're feverishly writing things down for takeaways and then hitting the rewind button and then listening to it over and over again. Okay, last question, Tim. In terms of advice for some folks that are going into the insights industry, brand spanking new, just some words of wisdom, some things that can help them. to coming into the great industry that we've been involved in?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I give a talk around companies all the time called The Science Behind Empathy and Storytelling. And I try to end it with this piece of advice, which I would give to anybody in the insights space, because I'm typically talking to insights leaders at those companies. And the one thing is, I think what happens a lot of times with people in the insight space is they start, the familiarity and the roteness of it and things like that start to become where it just feels like a job. Like I'm an insights manager, I'm an analyst, I'm whatever it is in that role. And it's just a job. So I get up and I do my job every day. I present the data, I present the feedback of the report or whatever. And what I try to do in that sort of inspire challenge piece is to say, no, it's not a job. You are the storytellers of the marketplace. Think about that. The most impactful, I think the most fruitful ground we have to change the world is the marketplace, right? And insights leaders are the storytellers of the marketplace, and they don't realize it. And so when their feet hit the ground in the morning, I want them to say, I'm not going to do a job. I get to go tell people stories that will affect the way that companies make products or that deliver messages that actually lift people up or make their lives better or solve problems for them. And I do it through my power of storytelling. And when you start to reframe, if you're an insights leader or somebody who's led an insights company or you're a consultant or whatever it is, man, you're the storyteller. And that's the way you have to do it, is I get to tell stories that actually inspire, empathically connect, and create change in the marketplace and rewire people who have been hardwired a certain way that maybe is not working for them. So anyway, that would be the advice, is don't go into it as a job. Go into it as, I get to do this. I get to be the storyteller.
Tim, a lot of great insight. Thanks again for listening to Tim Urmston. This is the On the Mark podcast, and my name is Merrill Dubrow. Have a great day.
Hey, that was fun, man. We should do this more often.